Hello, welcome to my contemporary family needs analysis over LGBTQ family systems. Today, I will be discussing current families in our country whose population has grown tremendously in the last decade with the help of legislation that recognized marriages and a social culture that has steadily become more tolerant and accepting. Despite this, they are regularly faced with disproportionate levels of discrimination, social stigmas, and injustices that adversely affect their overall well-being and ability to thrive in our society. In order to create change or provide support and deliver services as a helping profession, we must look at their needs and the problems that must be addressed. We must be able to provide culturally competent interventions that are evidence-based and promotes equity and ensures the wellness and safety of all LGBTQ individuals and their families. First, to help give you a better picture of the LGBTQ community, as of 2020, approximately 5.6% of adults, or an estimated 18 million in the US, identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer, with roughly half identifying as bisexual and 2 million identifying as transgender. Like other parents, LGBTQ parents are married, unmarried, cohabiting, separated, divorced, and single. There are intact families, blended families, and children who live between households. From data taken in 2017, an estimated 3.7 million children under 18 have either a single LGBTQ parent or raised by two same-sex parents, with over 25% of LGBTQ adults raising a child. The numbers today are expected to be significantly higher than this, as legal same-sex marriages has increased the gap between LGBTQ millennials and non-LGBTQ millennials that are actively planning to grow their families, which has narrowed to around 7%. Younger generations are coming out earlier in life, and couples are planning on creating their families through different ways, such as assisted reproductive technology surrogacy, adoption, and foster care where it's allowed. Coming out at earlier ages has important implications for how practitioners work with youth and family systems, how they're able to educate parents and caregivers about sexual orientation and gender identity, and how services are provided to LGBTQ children and adolescents. Unlike racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ youth are usually raised by parents who aren't like them and rarely have knowledge of what it's like to be LGBTQ. Even in the most supportive families, the parents might be unaware of the level of daily harassment these youths may endure, and therefore they don't know how to buffer them from the discrimination they will experience. Those individuals who are out often find that their identities are questioned or not taken seriously. They may be told their orientation is a phase or that it's unacceptable. Some may even be hospitalized or forced into conversion therapies by families who have been convinced that they can change. The overall objective in helping families learn to support their LGBT children is not to change their values or deeply held beliefs. Practitioners should aim to meet the parents, families, and caregivers where they're at, to build an alliance to support their children, and to help them understand that family reactions that are experienced as rejection can contribute to serious health concerns and inhibit development and health and sense of security. Literature has found that parents and caregivers play a critical role for these children, and that LGBTQ youth whose parents and caregivers reject them reported high levels of negative health problems. In comparison to parents that showed support, the children showed greater well-being, better general health, and significantly decreased risk for suicide, depression, and substance abuse. Family acceptance has a direct impact improving mental health, suicidal behavior, and preventing substance abuse, as well as promoting self-esteem and social support. An affirmative family-oriented approach to services and care includes providing accurate information on sexual orientation and gender identity for parent and caregivers early in their child's development, engaging, educating, counseling, and making appropriate referrals for families with LGBT children, and in particular, helping parents and caregivers who react to their LGBT children with ambivalence and rejection understand how their reactions contribute to health risks for this vulnerable population. Major problems that must be addressed in our heteronormative society while working with this system, as we discussed already, is instances of family rejection. This increases the possibility of homelessness. It's important to point out that around 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. A study on adolescents that examined strong rejection from families due to their identities were 8 times more likely to try to commit suicide, 6 times more likely to report high levels of depression, 3 times more likely to use illegal drugs, and 3 times more likely to have risky sex. Given the lack of recognition and the sociocultural vacuum in which many LGBTQ families find themselves, even identifying as an LGBT family is potentially a socio-psychological political act that can both empower and disempower and stigmatize LGBT families. Many of the challenges LGBT-headed families experience stem from the societal and sociological rather than from psychological factors, and it's critical to acknowledge that social stigma, homophobia, and discrimination are responsible for many stressors and problems that must be addressed. We also see these challenges through discriminatory acts and violence, laws, and policies that oppress and limit opportunities. Regardless of whether they live in urban or rural settings, large cultural systems such as legal system, politics, healthcare policy, religion, and value systems affect these individuals and their families by shaping the larger social and structural forces with which they interact. These problems can escalate into numerous health difficulties for adults that cause high levels of psychological harm, limit social support, deteriorate work or school performance, increase risk of substance abuse, psychiatric hospitalization, risky sexual behavior or activities, or sexually transmitted diseases, harassment, violence, and suicidal ideation. Because of the extent of risk and problems this population faces, it's our ethical responsibility as social workers to be an ally by ensuring an affirmative space, an unbiased environment for LGBTQ individuals and their families to feel heard and empowered. When utilizing an affirmative therapy approach, the lives of LGBTQ individuals and families are best understood through the lens of intersectionality. As a holistic approach to diversity, intersectionality recognizes how multiple aspects of identity intersect to influence the experiences of people and families. This includes being aware of how the discrimination and marginalization we've discussed shape one another and have a cumulative impact. Being an affirmative therapist is more than just using the correct pronouns, using non-assuming language, or hanging an LGBTQ flag in your office. In order to create a safe and professional space, we must be knowledgeable and up to date with the general social climate. Just as we would with any other issues worked with in daily practice, we must be aware of legal and policy trends and current social discourse surrounding LGBTQ issues. For example, are sexual orientation and gender identity protected minority statuses in your state? Do same-gender, non-biological partners have second parent adoption rights? What is the process for trans individuals to change the gender marker on their birth certificate or driver's license? Are same-gender marriages or civil unions recognized in your state? These are only a few of the laws and policies affecting this system that is suggested that a therapist should know. In addition to knowledge of laws and policies, there are other kinds of information related to the social climate in which an affirmative family therapist should be aware. The closest LGBTQ community center, which physicians or residential treatment centers are LGBTQ friendly, which churches are affirming. Knowing these things has proven to make a huge impact with LGBTQ families, particularly because they often encounter individuals and service providers that are unaware of information relevant to their lives. Trans individuals in particular report needing to educate the therapist on transgender-related issues. This is where our professional responsibility as social workers to continue education opportunities and getting involved in our local communities is so important. Whatever the presenting problem may be, it's suggested to conduct a systemic assessment that's informed by concepts from the family life cycle perspective and ecological systems theory. In addition to typical information gathered in a mental health assessment, a goal is to gain a thorough understanding of the social support networks of LGBTQ families, including family of choice / creation and communities and not only the biological family. The social support structures that can be found through an eco-map or ecogram can be an invaluable protective factor for the individual, as well as be helpful toward the therapeutic relationship and making us more affirmative in our role. Once the focus of therapy is identified, goals should be identified and prioritized collaboratively. It's important to avoid identifying presenting problems and focus of treatment that aren't directly tied to the reason the family sought therapy. Overemphasis to LGBTQ-related content can further marginalize the family. An affirmative therapist must listen to the needs of clients and recognize the unique and resilient ways in which they navigate the stresses of living in a heteronormative, cisnormative society. Based on research, The social support buffers mitigates experience of discrimination is vital for healthy family functioning. The most important interventions for an LGBTQ family seeking therapy is to assess and implement strategies to enhance their social support network. In order to best plan for interventions, an affirmative therapist takes into account research over the processes that are likely to impact many LGBTQ families seeking therapy and recognizes the unique way in which they do family. There is much diversity in how LGBTQ families navigate typical family pathways such as parenting. Affirmative therapy helps assist clients in making decisions in ways that honor the client's values and desires. Narrative therapy techniques that encourage the family to create their own story or narrative that represents their unique family. Using solution-focused interventions such as the miracle question and focusing on possibilities rather than barriers can be helpful in families to process their decisions. LGBTQ families also might seek therapy to help negotiate family norms and expectations. Although similar to heterosexual families, LGBTQ families processes are complicated because of the stigmatizing social context in which they are surrounded with. Affirmative therapists can use emotionally focused interventions to de-escalate conflict while also highlighting and building on strengths that the family brings into therapy. A framework or plan of action for my affirmative approach includes first, creating an affirmative setting through the physical office space, as well as in the language that is affirming and non-assuming, both verbally and in paperwork or documentation. Second, incorporating a family life cycle perspective. Third, conducting a systemic family assessment with the help of the clients. Fourth, balance my knowledge of issues affecting this family system and the client's significant expertise of their life experiences. And lastly, ensuring that my chosen interventions are tailored to the family's unique needs and set therapy goals. In order to provide the best care and service delivery that addresses LGBTQ families, we must look at social work practices' strengths and challenges and the implications for future practice. Several challenges that are going to come up in practice are going to be tied to the socio-political culture and problems we've already discussed, such as state laws, policies, and cultural or religious values. But depending on where you're located, social workers might also be faced with the lack of funding for their agencies, programs, services, or mental health resources, and this is especially true for rural communities where they are demographically the fewest protections. There is a significant lack of access to mental health professionals and other resources. Despite these challenges, social workers, especially our current graduating class that is about to enter the workforce in the middle of a pandemic, can be strong allies for this family system because of our values and ethical responsibilities to be culturally competent with diverse populations, our knowledge of family systems and relationships, and the ability to connect families to inclusive and affirmative resources either in their community or virtually. But also, it's our shared commitment to promote laws, policies, and programs that affirm, support, and values LGBTQ individuals, families, and the community. Utilizing and exerting these strengths in everyday practice while utilizing an affirmative therapy approach will ensure the health and wellness of this family system, but also promote a society that is equitable and inclusive for everyone.